I was crouched behind the filing cabinet in my husband's home office when I heard him tell his lawyer exactly how he planned to drain every penny from my cosmetics empire before serving me divorce papers. What he didn't know was that my phone was recording every word. I'd already photographed the forged documents on his desk, and my attorney was waiting for my call. By the time he realized I was 20 steps ahead, his entire scheme would collapse around him. Before we dive back in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if this story resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is something truly special I can't wait to share. But before we dive into how I dismantled his plan piece by piece, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you've ever felt betrayed by someone you trusted completely, hit that subscribe button because this story will show you exactly how to fight back smart. Now, let me take you back to where this nightmare began. My name is Cassandra Monroe, and I built my beauty empire from a single homemade lip balm recipe I created in my kitchen 7 years ago. At 36, I was the CEO and founder of Luxe Glow Cosmetics, a company that had exploded from farmers market sales to a multi-million-dollar brand sold in over 2,000 stores across the country. We just signed a deal with a major retail chain that would put us in another 5,000 locations by next year. My company wasn't just successful, it was mine. Every formula, every marketing campaign, every business decision had my fingerprints on it. Luxe Glow generated approximately $18 million annually, and I owned 100% of it. I had 3 manufacturing facilities, a corporate headquarters in downtown Silver Pine Heights, and a research lab where my team of chemists developed new products. I met Cameron Whitfield 5 years ago at a business networking event at the Grandview Hotel. He was polished, charming, working as a brand strategist for a mid-sized marketing firm. He didn't have much money, but he had ambition and creative ideas, or so I thought. What I mistook for genuine partnership was actually careful calculation. We married after a whirlwind 2-year courtship. I was completely transparent about my business from day one, even walking him through my financials and intellectual property portfolio during our engagement. I believe in complete honesty. I'd told him over dinner at Marcello's, our favorite restaurant. No secrets, especially about money and business. He'd taken my hand and looked into my eyes with what seemed like genuine warmth. Your success is incredible, Cass. I'd never want to take that away from you. I want to support you in building something even bigger. Looking back now with brutal clarity, I can see exactly what he was doing. He wasn't admiring my success, he was cataloging it. Studying every asset, every revenue stream, every vulnerability. Building a detailed map of exactly what he planned to steal. The discovery happened on a Wednesday afternoon in mid-October. The autumn air in Silver Pine Heights had that crisp quality that made everything feel sharper, more vivid. I'd left my office early that day, planning to surprise Cameron with tickets to see his favorite band performing downtown that weekend. I'd been working brutal hours preparing for the retail expansion, and I wanted to do something thoughtful to reconnect. Our home was a restored craftsman-style house in the Maplewood neighborhood, one of the most beautiful historic districts in the city. I'd purchased it 3 years ago and spent a fortune renovating it to preserve its original character while updating everything inside. The irony that I'd literally built the house he was plotting to take from me still makes my blood boil. I pulled into our driveway at 3:15 and immediately noticed Cameron's car. Strange. He'd texted just 90 minutes earlier saying he had client meetings all afternoon and would be home around 7. I grabbed my bag and headed inside, calling out his name as I entered through the front door. Nothing. The house felt empty, silent in that particular way that makes you instinctively lower your voice. I checked the kitchen, the living room, our bedroom. All empty. Then I heard it, a low murmur of voices coming from Cameron's home office on the 2nd floor. He'd converted one of the spare bedrooms into his workspace, and the door was closed, which was unusual. Cameron typically left his door open during normal business calls. Something in my gut twisted with warning. Call it intuition, call it subconscious pattern recognition, but I knew something was wrong. Very wrong. I slipped off my heels and climbed the stairs silently, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. As I got closer to his office, I could distinguish 2 distinct voices. Cameron's familiar tone, and another man's voice, deeper and more authoritative, speaking in hushed but urgent tones. The office door didn't close completely. There was about a half-inch gap where the latch didn't quite catch. I positioned myself against the wall where I could hear clearly but wouldn't be visible if the door suddenly opened. The trademark transfers need to happen before she has any idea what we're doing, the unfamiliar voice said with cold precision. Once all the intellectual property is in your name, the divorce filing becomes remarkably simple. She'll have no legal standing to claim ownership of what's technically yours. My entire world stopped. The air left my lungs. My vision actually blurred for a moment as my brain struggled to process what I was hearing. It took a lot of care and time to prepare and narrate this for you, so if you're enjoying it, a quick subscribe really helps and means the world to us. Alright, let's get back to it. How long will the paperwork take? That was Cameron's voice, but not the Cameron I knew. This wasn't the supportive husband who brought me coffee during late-night work sessions. This was someone else entirely, someone calculating and devoid of warmth. 2 to 3 weeks if everything processes smoothly, the lawyer replied. I've prepared the intellectual property assignment documents using the signature authorization we discussed. The beauty of this approach is that it appears completely legitimate, standard spousal business restructuring for tax optimization and liability protection. By the time she realizes what's happened, the transfers will be finalized and legally binding. And the prenup? Cameron asked, and I could hear the anticipation in his voice. Actually works in our favor, the lawyer said with what sounded like satisfaction. Since you signed a prenuptial agreement protecting her premarital assets, these transfers will appear to be standard marital estate planning rather than asset seizure. No judge will question a husband and wife consolidating intellectual property and business assets for estate planning purposes, especially when you can demonstrate you've been actively involved in the business. I pressed my hand over my mouth to stop the sound threatening to escape. The prenup. The agreement I'd insisted on to protect what I'd built before our marriage was being weaponized as the perfect cover for theft. My mind was reeling, but through the shock, a cold clarity began to emerge. Cameron hadn't just stumbled into this scheme. This was premeditated, carefully planned, methodical theft disguised as legitimate business restructuring. And I'd heard every word. It took every ounce of self-control I possessed to prepare and narrate this next part for you. If you're finding this story gripping, a quick subscribe would mean the world to us and helps us continue bringing you these powerful stories. Now, let's get back to how I started building my case. I stayed frozen against that wall for what felt like hours but was probably only 3 or 4 minutes. My mind was racing through 1,000 thoughts simultaneously, shock, fury, disbelief, and underneath it all, a crystallizing sense of purpose. I heard chairs scraping against the floor. They were wrapping up their meeting. I had maybe 45 seconds before Cameron would open that door and find me standing there like some character in a bad thriller. I moved quickly but silently back down the stairs, grabbed my heels, and walked straight out the front door. I got in my car, started the engine with trembling hands, and drove. I didn't have a destination in mind. I just needed to move, to process, to think. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The concert tickets sat in my passenger seat, mocking me with their cheerful purple envelopes. I'd been planning a romantic gesture while my husband was plotting to steal my entire life's work. I ended up at Crescent Lake Park, sitting in my car overlooking the water. The sun was beginning to set, painting everything in shades of copper and gold. Beautiful. Peaceful. Completely at odds with the chaos exploding inside my chest. I could confront him right now. Drive back, storm into his office, scream, throw things, demand answers. I could call the police immediately and report what I'd overheard. Or, and this thought cut through the emotional noise with sharp clarity, I could be smarter than that. Cameron thought he was executing the perfect plan. He thought he'd found the ideal legal loophole to steal $18 million worth of intellectual property and business assets. What he didn't realize was that I'd built that $18 million empire by being sharper, faster, and more strategic than every competitor who'd tried to crush me. If he wanted to play games with my company, my formulas, my trademarks, fine. I'd play too. But I'd play to win. I pulled out my phone and opened a new note. At the top, I typed, "Evidence collection, day 1." Below that, I began documenting everything I could remember. The lawyer's voice, the mention of signature authorization, the 2 to 3 week timeline, the specific mention of trademark transfers, the intellectual property assignment documents. Then I made a phone call. "Natalie, it's Cassandra. I need to see you tonight. Emergency meeting." My voice was steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. Natalie Reeves was my chief operating officer and the closest thing I had to a sister. We'd met 8 years ago at a Women in Business conference when we were both struggling entrepreneurs trying to break through in our respective industries. She'd built her own successful consulting firm specializing in corporate restructuring while I was still selling lip balms at weekend markets. "What's wrong?" Natalie's voice immediately shifted to concern. "I can't explain over the phone. Can you meet me at your place in 30 minutes? I'll be there." "Cass, are you okay?" "I will be," I said, and I meant it. "Just bring any copies you have of our corporate documents. Every single one." When I arrived at Natalie's modern loft apartment in the Harbor District, she took one look at my face and immediately poured 2 glasses of wine. "Talk," she said, gesturing to her minimalist leather sofa. I told her everything. The overheard conversation, Cameron's conspiracy with the mysterious lawyer, the planned intellectual property transfers, the weaponization of my own prenuptial agreement. As I spoke, Natalie's expression shifted from shock to rage to something colder, calculated determination. "That absolute son of a bitch," she said quietly when I finished. The quiet tone made it more frightening somehow. Natalie didn't get loud when she was angry. She got strategic. "How long have you been married?" 5 years this December. "And he's been planning this for how long, do you think?" That was the question that had been haunting me during the drive to her apartment. "I don't know. Could be months. Could be years." Natalie stood and walked to her home office, returning with her laptop and a leather portfolio. "Okay, first things first. We need to protect the company's intellectual property immediately. Tomorrow morning, I'm calling our corporate attorney, Benjamin Cross. We'll restructure the trademark registrations into a trust that requires multiple signatories for any changes. Won't that tip Cameron off that I'm suspicious?" "No, because we'll position it as my idea for asset protection purposes. You can even mention it to him casually, like I'm being overly cautious about corporate liability. He won't connect it to his plans because as far as he knows, you're completely clueless about what he's scheming." I nodded, grateful for her clarity while my mind was still spinning. "What else?" "We need to identify this lawyer. The one Cameron is meeting with. Did you recognize the voice at all?" "No. But he sounded experienced, established. The way he talked about legal loopholes, this isn't his first time helping someone commit fraud." Natalie's fingers flew across her keyboard. "Cameron uses Sterling and Associates for his regular business consulting work, right? His marketing firm?" "Yes, but this felt different. More personal. Like this lawyer was working specifically for Cameron on this scheme, not representing his employer." Natalie pulled up several legal directories on her screen. "Here's what we're going to do tomorrow. You're going to follow Cameron. I know it sounds dramatic, but we need to know which law office he's visiting. Once we have a name, we can research this person's background, check for complaints, look for patterns." The thought of following my own husband like some kind of private investigator made my stomach turn, but she was absolutely right. "Okay. I can do that." "Good. Now, tonight, we need to secure your digital footprint." Natalie pulled out a legal pad and began making notes. "Do you have all your corporate documents, formulas, and intellectual property filings backed up somewhere Cameron can't access?" "They're in our company server and in our shared cloud storage at home. Remove everything from the shared storage tonight. Create a new account he doesn't know about. Also, and this is critical, check your email settings. Make sure there aren't any forwarding rules or access permissions you didn't create yourself." My blood ran cold. "You think he's been monitoring my emails?" If he's planning something this elaborate, he's been gathering information systematically. That lawyer mentioned signature authorization and documents. Cameron got those materials somewhere. Either he's photographed your physical files or he's accessed your digital communications. I immediately pulled out my phone and logged into my email account. Natalie watched over my shoulder as I navigated to the settings menu. There, buried in the forwarding and filters section, was a rule I'd never created. All emails containing the keywords, trademark, patent, formula, proprietary, intellectual property, or licensing, were being automatically forwarded to an email address I didn't recognize, email protected. "Oh my God," I whispered, my hands shaking. Natalie's jaw tightened. "Screenshot that immediately. That's evidence of unauthorized access to confidential business communications. Then delete it, but keep the screenshot." My hands trembled as I captured the evidence and removed the forwarding rule. How long has he been reading my emails? I checked the rule creation date. 7 months ago. 7 months. For 7 months, Cameron had been intercepting my business communications. Reading my confidential exchanges with chemists, manufacturers, distributors, and attorneys. He'd been building a complete intelligence file on every aspect of my business operations. "Cassandra," Natalie said gently, "we need to assume he knows everything about your business for at least the past 7 months. Every negotiation, every formula development, every financial projection. He's been creating a comprehensive map of your assets." I felt physically sick. But beneath the nausea, that cold clarity was sharpening into something harder. Something more useful. "Then we use that against him," I said. Natalie smiled grimly. "Exactly what I was thinking. If he believes you're unaware, he'll continue acting normally. We can use that window to build our own case while he thinks he's the only one gathering intelligence." We spent the next 4 hours creating a comprehensive strategy. Natalie, with her systematic corporate mind, broke it down into clear phases. Phase 1, evidence collection. Follow Cameron to identify the lawyer. Document all suspicious communications and activities. Secure all intellectual property documents in locations Cameron couldn't access. Check financial accounts for unusual activity. Review all corporate filings for unauthorized changes. Phase 2, legal protection. Consult with a divorce attorney specializing in business asset protection. Place protective holds on all trademark registrations and patents. Restructure vulnerable intellectual property into protected corporate trusts. Prepare documentation of Cameron's unauthorized email access. Engage forensic IT specialist to track his digital footprint. Phase 3, counter strategy. Determine optimal timing for confrontation. Decide whether to pursue criminal charges for corporate espionage and fraud. Plan how to expose his conspiracy while maintaining control of the business narrative. Protect company reputation and investor confidence. By the time I left Natalie's apartment at nearly 1 in the morning, I had a detailed action plan and a renewed sense of control. The devastation I'd felt earlier had transformed into something more powerful, absolute determination. When I arrived home, Cameron's car was in the driveway. The house lights were on. I sat in my car for a long moment, preparing myself to walk inside and pretend everything was normal. To smile at the man who was plotting to destroy everything I'd built. To sleep next to someone who saw me not as a wife, but as a target. I could do this. I'd negotiated with ruthless distributors, outmaneuvered corporate competitors, and built a multi-million-dollar company in one of the most cutthroat industries in the world. I could certainly fool one treacherous husband for a few weeks. Cameron was in the kitchen when I entered, making herbal tea. "Hey, where have you been? I got home around 6:30 and you weren't here." The casual tone. The easy smile. The concerned husband act. If I hadn't heard that conversation in his office, I'd never suspect a thing. "Oh, I stopped by Natalie's," I said, keeping my voice light and normal. She wanted to discuss some corporate restructuring ideas. You know how she gets paranoid about liability protection. I watched his face carefully for any reaction. Did his smile tighten slightly? Did his eyes narrow just a fraction? That sounds smart, he said, pouring hot water into a mug. Want some chamomile? You look stressed. The irony of him offering comfort while secretly planning my destruction wasn't lost on me. Long day, I replied, accepting the tea. How was your afternoon? Boring client calls. Nothing exciting. Another lie delivered smoothly, casually. Actually, I was thinking we should do something fun this weekend. Maybe drive up to Pinecrest Mountain. That spa you love. He was good. Really good. Planning romantic getaways while meeting with lawyers to steal my life's work. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. That sounds perfect, I said, matching his warm tone. I'd love that. We sat at our kitchen island sipping tea and discussing weekend plans like a normal couple. He asked about my day, laughed at my story about a shipping delay with our manufacturer, even massaged my shoulders when I mentioned tension from sitting at my desk too long. Every touch felt like a performance. Every word felt like manipulation. When we finally went to bed, Cameron fell asleep quickly, his breathing deep and even. No guilt keeping him awake. No conscience troubling his rest. I lay beside him in the darkness, my mind racing through tomorrow's plan. I'd follow him. I'd get the lawyer's name. And then I'd begin building a case so comprehensive that Cameron would never see it coming until it was far, far too late. My phone was hidden under my pillow, recording app ready. If he said anything incriminating in his sleep or during early morning calls, I'd capture it. As I finally drifted towards sleep, I thought about Cameron's words from our wedding day, everything I am is yours, and everything you are makes us stronger together. He'd meant it differently than I'd understood. He'd been planning this from much earlier than I wanted to admit. But he'd made one critical miscalculation. He'd underestimated exactly how ruthless I could be when protecting what was mine. The next morning, I woke before Cameron and slipped downstairs to my home office. I had 3 critical calls to make before he woke up, and I needed complete privacy for all of them. First, I called Miranda Ashford, the most aggressive divorce attorney in Silverpine Heights. I'd never met her personally, but her reputation was legendary. She'd secured record-breaking settlements for her clients and was known for her absolutely ruthless approach to marital litigation. Other attorneys called her the shark behind her back, which she'd apparently embraced as a compliment. Ashford Legal Group, a crisp voice answered. This is Cassandra Monroe. I need an emergency consultation today. It's regarding asset protection in an anticipated divorce. There was a brief pause. Ms. Monroe from LuxGlow Cosmetics? Yes. Hold please. 20 seconds later, a commanding voice came on the line. Ms. Monroe, Miranda Ashford here. I've been following your company's expansion with interest. Impressive work. What's the situation? I gave her the condensed version. Husband plotting to steal intellectual property. Meeting with lawyer today. Needed immediate legal protection for my business assets. Have you confronted him yet? No. He doesn't know I'm aware of anything. Excellent. Keep it that way. Can you come in at 11? I'll clear my schedule. I'll be there. My second call was to Dr. Felix Hartman, a forensic IT specialist I'd worked with 2 years ago when we suspected a former employee of stealing product formulas. If Cameron had been monitoring my digital communications, there would be traces everywhere, and Felix could find them all. Felix, it's Cassandra Monroe from LuxGlow. I need your help with something urgent and extremely sensitive. I'm listening. I need a complete forensic analysis of my business and personal digital footprint for the past year. Every account, every device, every communication channel. I'm looking for evidence of unauthorized access and surveillance. Felix was quiet for a moment. Should I assume this is related to corporate espionage? Personal espionage, actually. My husband. I think he's been systematically accessing my confidential business communications to build a case for stealing my intellectual property. Jesus. Okay, I'll need administrative access to all your accounts and devices. Can you come to my office this afternoon? I'll send you authorization codes by 2 o'clock. The third call was the hardest. I dialed my sister, Lauren Monroe Hayes, who lived 3 hours away in Brookstone. Lauren was a federal prosecutor specializing in white-collar crime, and while she couldn't represent me personally, her expertise in fraud cases would be invaluable. Cass. Her voice was thick with sleep. I'd woken her. It's 6:45. What's wrong? I'm sorry to call so early, but I need your legal expertise. Not as my sister, as a prosecutor who understands fraud and corporate espionage. I heard rustling as she sat up. Tell me everything. I walked her through the entire situation. The overheard conversation, the email forwarding rule, the planned intellectual property transfers, the weaponization of my prenuptial agreement. As I spoke, I could hear her breathing change, her prosecutor brain fully engaging. Cass, this isn't just divorce territory. This is criminal fraud, corporate espionage, unauthorized access to confidential business communications, possibly identity theft if he's forging signatures. If he's using electronic communications to facilitate this scheme, you're looking at wire fraud too. You need to involve law enforcement. Not yet. If I go to the police now with just an overheard conversation, it might not be enough. He'll destroy evidence, claim I misunderstood, turn it into a he said she said situation. Lauren was silent for a long moment. You're thinking like a prosecutor. Build the case first, make it absolutely airtight, then bring it to authorities when he has no escape route. Exactly. Okay. Here's what you need to gather. Recordings if legally permissible in your state. Documented evidence of the unauthorized email access, which you already have, good. Copies of any documents he's forged or intends to forge. Financial records showing any unusual transactions. Communication logs between him and this lawyer. And ideally, you want the lawyer to flip on Cameron once the scheme is exposed. That last one seems unlikely. You'd be surprised. If the attorney realizes the conspiracy has been discovered and documented, he might cooperate to avoid disbarment and criminal charges himself. No lawyer wants to lose their license and face prison time for helping a client commit fraud. We talked for another 30 minutes, with Lauren outlining exactly what evidence would be most valuable from a criminal prosecution standpoint. By the time Cameron's alarm went off upstairs, I had a comprehensive road map for building an ironclad case. I quickly shut my office door and headed to the kitchen to make coffee, slipping seamlessly back into the role of unsuspecting wife. Cameron came downstairs dressed in one of his tailored suits, the ones I'd helped pay for, I now realized with bitter irony. You're up early, he said, kissing my forehead with practiced affection. Couldn't sleep. The retail expansion is consuming my brain. So many moving pieces. He poured himself coffee. You'll handle it perfectly. You always do. The casual confidence in his voice. Did he really think I was that oblivious? That I wouldn't notice when my entire company suddenly transferred out of my control? Or was he planning to be long gone by the time I discovered the theft? What's your schedule today? I asked, keeping my tone light. Meetings all morning with the team at Sterling and Associates. Then I have a consultation around 2:30. Should be home by 6, though. Consultation. Such a clean euphemism for conspiracy to commit fraud. Want me to pick up dinner from that Vietnamese place you love? That would be perfect. He grabbed his briefcase, likely containing whatever documents the lawyer had requested. Love you. Love you too. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. The moment his car pulled out of our driveway, I sprang into action. First stop, Cameron's home office. The hidden camera Natalie had helped me install yesterday evening in a decorative bookend would capture any activity, but I needed to search for physical evidence while I had the chance. I pulled on thin cotton gloves, no fingerprints on anything I shouldn't be touching. His desk was organized with almost obsessive precision. Client folders arranged alphabetically, pens lined up perfectly parallel, not a paper clip out of place. Nothing obviously incriminating on the surface. But Cameron was meticulous. He wouldn't leave evidence in plain sight. I systematically checked every drawer. Business cards, office supplies, old contracts, marketing proposals. Then, in the bottom drawer hidden beneath a stack of industry magazines, I found an expandable file folder. Inside were printed copies of my trademark registrations. All of them. Lux Glow, our signature product names like Radiance Elixir and a Velvet Touch Foundation, even our proprietary formula designations. Each registration was marked with sticky notes containing handwritten annotations in Cameron's distinctive script. Primary target, transfer first, complicated registration, may need additional documentation, high value, priority. My hands shook as I photographed each document with my phone, making absolutely certain to capture Cameron's handwriting on every note. This was premeditation documented in his own hand. But there was more. Behind the trademark registrations, I found printed email exchanges, conversations with the mysterious lawyer. The email address was different from the forwarding rule I'd discovered, email protected. I photographed every single page, my anger building with each new revelation. The email chain stretched back 9 months. 9 months of detailed planning, strategizing, discussing optimal methods to legally steal my life's work. One email made my vision blur with rage. The key is patience. Let her continue developing new products and expanding the brand while you position yourself as the involved, supportive husband. The more valuable the intellectual property becomes before the transfer, the more profitable this becomes for you. She's essentially working to build your future wealth while believing she's building your shared life together. Cameron's response, agreed. She's completely consumed with the retail expansion right now. She doesn't notice anything beyond product development and sales numbers. Perfect timing for us. They were discussing me like I was a resource to be exploited. A convenient workhorse building value they planned to extract. I photographed everything, then carefully replaced the folder exactly as I'd found it. Cameron was methodical and observant. He'd notice immediately if anything was disturbed. Next, I checked his desktop computer, the one he kept in his office for personal use separate from his work laptop. Using the password I'd seen him enter dozens of times, I accessed his browser history. He'd been researching intellectual property law, trademark transfer procedures, and most damning, how to transfer business assets without spouse's knowledge and, can wife contest intellectual property transfer? Screenshot. 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 I also found bookmarked articles about offshore business structures and asset protection trusts in the Cayman Islands. He wasn't just planning to steal my company, he was planning to hide it somewhere I couldn't reach it. By the time I finished documenting everything in his office, I had over 300 photographs and screenshots. But I needed more. I needed to know who this lawyer was and exactly what they planned to execute today at 2:30. At 11 o'clock, I drove to Miranda Ashford's office in the gleaming Riverside Tower downtown. Her suite occupied the entire 15th floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of Silverpine Heights Business District. Miranda herself was exactly what I expected, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, silver hair cut in a precise bob, and eyes that seemed to catalog and analyze everything they observed. "Ms. Monroe," she said, gesturing to a leather chair across from her imposing mahogany desk. "Show me what you have." I spent the next 90 minutes walking her through everything. The overheard conversation, the email forwarding, the documents in Cameron's office, the 9 months of conspiratorial emails, the research into asset hiding and offshore structures. I showed her every photograph, every screenshot, every piece of evidence I'd meticulously collected. Miranda's expression remained professionally neutral throughout, but her fingers drummed once on her desk when I showed her the emails, the only outward sign of emotion. "This is extraordinary work," she said finally. "Most people who discover this kind of betrayal react emotionally and confront immediately, destroying any chance of building a solid case. You've done the opposite. You've documented a conspiracy so thoroughly that your husband will have virtually no defense. What happens now?" "Now, we protect your assets immediately and prepare for both criminal and civil proceedings." Miranda pulled out a legal pad and began writing. "First, we're filing emergency motions to place protective holds on all your intellectual property registrations. No transfers can occur without court approval and your explicit consent. Won't that alert Cameron that I know? We'll file under seal, citing confidential business reasons. He won't be notified unless he actively tries to execute a transfer, at which point he'll discover it's blocked. By then, we'll have additional evidence. What about criminal charges? That's where it gets interesting. Your sister is correct, this is criminal fraud, corporate espionage, and potentially multiple other charges. However, I recommend we let Cameron take one more step toward execution before involving law enforcement. My stomach twisted. You want me to let him proceed? Think strategically. Right now, we have conspiracy and planning. Serious crimes, yes, but defense attorneys can sometimes argue their client was merely exploring options or had second thoughts. If Cameron actually attempts to execute the transfer today, if he signs fraudulent documents, if he takes concrete action toward the theft, the case becomes absolutely unassailable. Miranda leaned forward. I'm going to have a private investigator follow him this afternoon. We'll document him entering the law office, photograph the attorney he's meeting with, establish a timeline. Once we identify the lawyer, we can research their background and potentially add them as a co-conspirator in the fraud charges. And then? Then we go to law enforcement with a case so comprehensive that Cameron's only option will be pleading guilty. And when he does, you'll have complete leverage in both the criminal proceedings and the divorce settlement. I took a deep breath. She was right. One more afternoon of patience would result in a prosecution so strong that Cameron couldn't escape. Okay. One more day. Good. Now, I need you to sign these documents authorizing me to represent you. Miranda slid a folder across her desk. We're also going to discuss strategy for the divorce filing itself. My recommendation is to wait until Cameron is arrested, likely within the next week, and file divorce papers simultaneously. He'll be too overwhelmed dealing with criminal charges to mount any effective response in divorce court. As I signed the authorization paperwork, Miranda asked one final question. How are you holding up emotionally, Ms. Monroe? The question surprised me. Miranda didn't seem like someone who concerned herself with feelings. Honestly, I'm furious. But I'm channeling that fury into building an airtight case. Every time I feel myself getting emotional, I focus on evidence collection and strategic planning. Miranda smiled, a rare expression that transformed her severe features. You remind me of myself 25 years ago when I discovered my first husband's financial betrayal. The rage can make you extraordinarily sharp if you direct it properly. You're going to be fine, Ms. Monroe. Better than fine. I left her office at 1:15, which gave me 45 minutes to position myself near Cameron's office before his 2:30 meeting. Miranda's private investigator, a former FBI agent named Douglas Chin, would handle the official surveillance, but I needed to see this myself. I parked across the street from Sterling and Associates and waited. At 2:15, Cameron emerged from the building carrying his briefcase. He walked 3 blocks north to a parking garage, then drove out in a silver sedan I'd never seen before. A rental car or borrowed vehicle. He was covering his tracks, making sure his regular car wouldn't be spotted near the lawyer's office. I followed at a careful distance as he drove to the Harbor Bay District, one of the city's most expensive neighborhoods. He pulled into the underground garage of the Azure Corporate Center, a luxury office building overlooking the waterfront. I quickly checked the building directory on my phone. 7th floor, Pemberton and Associates, attorneys at law. I had the name. I immediately texted it to Miranda and Douglas, then watched as Cameron disappeared into the building's glass lobby. He was in there for exactly 53 minutes. When he emerged, he looked satisfied, confident. Whatever he'd signed, whatever scheme he'd just set in motion, he believed he'd secured his future wealth. He had no idea that every step had been photographed, that his conspiracy was documented from a dozen different angles, that his entire plan was about to collapse. As I drove home, my phone buzzed with a text from Miranda, "We have him." Douglas got clear photographs. The attorney is Lawrence Pemberton, 58, been practicing for 32 years. 2 prior suspensions by the state bar for ethics violations involving fraudulent asset transfers. He's done this before. So Cameron had found a specialist. A lawyer who'd built a career helping people steal from their spouses. That evening, Cameron came home with Vietnamese takeout as planned, smiling and relaxed. We ate dinner together. We watched a documentary. We went to bed. And I slept soundly for the first time in days, knowing that by Monday morning, federal agents would be executing search warrants, evidence would be seized, and Cameron's entire world would implode. The weekend crawled by with excruciating slowness. Every interaction with Cameron felt like performing in a play where only I knew the script was about to change completely. Saturday morning, he suggested we go to the farmer's market downtown, the same market where I'd sold my first handmade lip balms 7 years ago. Remember when you had that little table with the hand-painted sign? Cameron said, holding my hand as we walked through the crowded stalls. Look how far you've come since then. The nostalgia in his voice would have been touching if I didn't know he was planning to steal everything I'd built since those humble beginnings. I wondered if he felt any guilt at all, or if I was simply a business transaction to him now. I couldn't have done it without your support, I said, the lie smooth on my tongue. In reality, Cameron had contributed nothing to LuxGlow's success except proximity and false encouragement. Sunday was worse. Cameron's parents came over for dinner, a monthly tradition we'd maintained since our wedding. Richard and Helen Whitfield were genuinely kind people who'd welcomed me into their family without reservation. Watching Cameron laugh and joke with them, playing the devoted son while his arrest loomed just hours away, made my chest tight with complicated emotions. You two are such a solid team, Helen said as she helped me clear plates after dinner. Richard and I were just saying how wonderful it is to see a marriage where both people genuinely support each other's dreams. I managed a smile, but the words felt like shards of glass. By this time tomorrow, her son would be in federal custody. Their family would be shattered by scandal and criminal charges. And while Cameron absolutely deserved everything coming to him, I felt genuine sorrow for the collateral damage about to devastate his parents. We've been very fortunate, I said carefully, hating the ambiguity but unable to offer false comfort. That night, lying in bed next to Cameron, I checked my phone one final time. Miranda had texted, everything is set. Federal agents will execute search warrants at 8 a.m. tomorrow at both Cameron's office and Pemberton's law firm. Stay home until you hear from me. I turned off my phone and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow, everything would change. The carefully constructed facade would shatter. The truth would explode into the open. Cameron slept peacefully beside me, completely unaware that in less than 10 hours, federal agents would be confiscating his computer, his files, every piece of evidence documenting his conspiracy. Monday morning arrived with unseasonably warm weather, as if the universe was mocking the storm about to break. Cameron woke early, energized and optimistic as he prepared for work. Big week ahead, he said, adjusting his tie in our bedroom mirror. I'm meeting with a potential new client who could bring significant revenue to Sterling and Associates. More lies, delivered with the same casual confidence he'd used for months. Good luck, I said, kissing him at the door. I'm working from home today. Need to finalize the packaging designs for the new fall collection. Perfect. Love you. Love you too. The moment his car disappeared down our street, I exhaled shakily and grabbed my phone. It was 7:45. 15 minutes until the raids began. At exactly 8:03, Miranda called. It's happening now. Federal agents are at both locations. Cameron is being detained for questioning at Sterling and Associates. My hands were shaking. Detained? Not arrested yet? Standard procedure. They'll detain him while they secure all evidence from his office, computer, files, phone records, everything. Once they've collected everything and confirmed the scope of the conspiracy, they'll make the formal arrest. You should expect a call from Cameron within the next hour or two. He'll be allowed one phone call. What do I say to him? Act shocked. Confused. Ask what's happening but don't offer any information or support. And Cassandra, do not go to the federal building. Do not try to see him. Let him sit with this alone. The call came at 9:17. I let it ring 4 times before answering, steadying my voice. Cameron? Cass. His voice was strained, tight with barely controlled panic. Something insane is happening. Federal agents are at my office. They're saying something about a fraud investigation and they've seized my computer, my files, everything. What? Fraud? Cameron, what's going on? I don't know. This is completely crazy. They won't tell me anything except that I need to come to the federal building for questioning. Cass, I need you to find a lawyer. A criminal defense attorney. A criminal attorney? Cameron, I don't understand what's. Just find someone. The best lawyer you can get. I'll call you as soon as they let me. The line went dead. I sat on my sofa, phone still pressed to my ear, and felt absolutely nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication, no triumph. Just a hollow numbness where my marriage used to be. My phone buzzed with a text from Natalie. News is already spreading through business circles. Cameron Whitfield detained in federal fraud investigation. Are you okay? I texted back, home. Can you come over? She arrived 20 minutes later with coffee and pastries, letting herself in with the spare key I'd given her years ago. It's really happening, I said as she wrapped me in a tight hug. Yes. And you did everything right. Remember that. We spent the next hour on a conference call with Miranda, who provided updates as information came in. The federal agents had found extensive evidence in Cameron's office, not just the documents I'd already photographed, but additional materials I hadn't known existed. Bank account information for an offshore account in Grand Cayman where Cameron had apparently been funneling small amounts of money for 18 months. Email communications with 2 other attorneys besides Lawrence Pemberton, suggesting Cameron had been shopping for someone willing to help him commit fraud until he found Pemberton. Most damning was a detailed timeline Cameron had created, a literal step-by-step plan for the theft, complete with contingency plans if I discovered certain aspects of the scheme before he could execute it. He thought of everything, Miranda said with grim admiration in her voice. Except for the possibility that you'd overhear him before he was ready to move forward. What happens now? Cameron will be formally arrested this afternoon and arraigned tomorrow morning. The charges will likely include conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted theft of intellectual property, unauthorized access to confidential business communications, wire fraud for using email to facilitate the scheme, and possibly identity theft if they can prove he planned to forge your signature on transfer documents. And Pemberton? Being arrested simultaneously. The district attorney is very interested in this case. Pemberton has been suspected of this kind of predatory legal work for years, but they've never had enough evidence to prosecute. Your documentation gives them everything they need to finally disbar him permanently and secure criminal convictions. After Miranda ended the call, Natalie made more coffee while I tried to process everything. The business news sites were already running stories. LuxGlow CEO's husband detained in corporate fraud investigation. They didn't name me specifically yet, referring only to a successful cosmetics entrepreneur, but my name would be public knowledge within hours. My phone exploded with calls and texts. Colleagues expressing shock and offering support. Clients asking if this would affect current orders and the retail expansion. Even a few reporters requesting comments. I ignored everyone except a text from Lauren, saw the news. You did the right thing. Call me when you're ready. That evening, alone in the house that suddenly felt cavernous and empty, I walked through each room as if seeing them with new eyes. The living room where Cameron and I had hosted business dinners. The kitchen where we'd cooked together on Sunday mornings. The bedroom where we'd shared 5 years of intimacy built entirely on his lies. I ended up in Cameron's office, the room where this nightmare had begun just days ago. The hidden camera was still recording, though there was nothing left to capture. The room felt different now, stripped of its menace. Just an empty space that would soon be repurposed into something useful. Sitting at his desk, I did something I'd been avoiding. I searched online for information about Cameron's past, his history before we met, anything that might explain who he really was beneath the charming facade. What I found made my blood run cold. An archived news article from 6 years ago, from a small business journal in the neighboring state. A civil lawsuit filed by a woman named Brielle Sutton against Cameron Whitfield for financial fraud in a business partnership. The case had been settled out of court, terms sealed. Cameron had never mentioned anyone named Brielle. According to his version of his past, he'd had a few casual relationships before me, but nothing serious, nothing that ended badly. I searched for Brielle Sutton and found her on social media. A successful event planning entrepreneur now living in Ashmont, 2 states away. On impulse, I sent her a private message. Miss Sutton, my name is Cassandra Monroe. I was married to Cameron Whitfield. He was arrested today for attempting to steal my business through fraud. I found a reference to your lawsuit against him years ago. If you're willing to talk, I'd like to hear your story. I didn't expect a response, especially not quickly. But within 30 minutes, my phone rang from an unknown number with an Ashmont area code. Is this Cassandra? A woman's voice, cautious but curious. Yes. Thank you for calling. I saw the news about Cameron's arrest. I can't say I'm surprised. Brielle's story was sickeningly familiar. They'd met 7 years ago at a business networking event. Whirlwind romance, engagement after 18 months. She'd owned a successful event planning company with 3 full-time employees and contracts with major corporate clients. Cameron convinced me to make him a full partner in the business, Brielle said, her voice carrying the weight of old wounds. He said his marketing expertise would help us expand. Within 8 months, he'd systematically drained our business accounts, over $200,000. He'd forged my signature on loan applications, created debts in the company's name, even stolen client deposits. When I discovered what he'd done and confronted him, he disappeared. Just vanished one afternoon while I was meeting with a client. I came back to the office and he was gone, along with our laptop containing all our client files. My stomach turned. What happened with the lawsuit? It took me 2 years to recover financially. I had to lay off my entire staff, default on the office lease, rebuild my reputation from scratch. The lawsuit got me some money back. His parents paid the settlement to avoid criminal charges, but the real damage went so much deeper than financial. His parents paid? They've done this before? Apparently Cameron pulled something similar in college. Scammed his roommate's family out of money for a fake investment opportunity. His parents covered it up then too, paid restitution to avoid police involvement. They paid me off with the condition that I sign a non-disclosure agreement. But you're talking to me now. The NDA. That agreement was to protect Cameron. I've spent years regretting my silence, realizing that I enabled him to do this to someone else. If I'd gone public, if I'd pushed for criminal charges instead of taking the settlement money, maybe he wouldn't have been free to target you. The guilt in her voice was palpable. Brielle, this isn't your fault. Cameron is a predator. He would have found a way regardless of what you did. Maybe. But listen, Cassandra, don't let his family pressure you into dropping charges or settling quietly. They'll try. They'll offer money, they'll appeal to your compassion, they'll promise Cameron will get help and change. Don't believe them. He's done this repeatedly. He'll do it again unless he faces real consequences. We talked for another hour. Brielle gave me details about Cameron's manipulation patterns, warning signs she'd missed, the careful way he'd studied her business before systematically dismantling it. After we hung up, I immediately called Miranda and shared everything Brielle had told me. This is significant, Miranda said. Pattern evidence. It proves Cameron's actions weren't a one-time mistake or momentary poor judgment. This is his established method of operation: target successful women, gain their trust, steal their businesses. Can we use this in court? Absolutely. I'm going to contact Brielle and see if she'll provide a deposition or testimony. With her story added to your evidence, we can establish that Cameron is a serial predator who specializes in this exact type of fraud. That night, I finally let myself feel the full weight of everything. Not just Cameron's betrayal, but the realization that our entire relationship had been a calculated performance. Every intimate moment, every shared dream, every promise, all of it had been theater performed by someone who saw me as a resource to exploit. I cried for the first time since discovering his conspiracy. Not because I still loved Cameron, that emotion had died the moment I heard him plotting with Pemberton. I cried for the loss of 5 years, for the violation of trust, for my shattered belief that people were fundamentally good. But I also cried with relief. Relief that I discovered the truth before he could destroy everything. Relief that I'd had the strength and strategic thinking to fight back methodically rather than emotionally. Relief that tomorrow, when he was arraigned and I filed for divorce, I'd be reclaiming control of my life. Tuesday morning arrived gray and cold, the weather finally matching the heaviness in my chest. I dressed in a navy suit that projected quiet authority and drove to the federal courthouse downtown. Media vans lined the street. Cameron's arrest had become a major story. Serial con artist targeted wife's cosmetics empire, read one headline. LuxGlow's CEO exposes husband's elaborate fraud scheme, read another. Inside the courtroom, I sat in the back row as Cameron was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit, hands cuffed. He looked diminished, smaller than the confident man who'd kissed me goodbye just yesterday morning. His eyes scanned the courtroom and found me. For a long moment, we stared at each other across that space. I watched shock register on his face, then understanding, then pure fury. He knew. Somehow he'd realized that I was responsible for his arrest, that I'd been the one gathering evidence, building the case, orchestrating his downfall. Good. I wanted him to know. The arraignment was brief and procedural. The prosecutor outlined the charges: conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted theft of intellectual property, unauthorized access to confidential communications, wire fraud, identity theft, and forgery. Cameron pled not guilty, as expected. Bail was set at $750,000. The defendant has demonstrated clear intent to flee, the prosecutor argued. He maintained an offshore account in Grand Cayman with funds that appear to be preparation for relocation once the theft was complete. He poses a significant flight risk. The judge agreed, setting bail higher than Cameron's attorney had anticipated. As Cameron was led out of the courtroom, he looked back at me one final time. His expression was no longer shock or fury, just cold, calculated hatred. I felt nothing in return. Whatever connection we'd once shared, real or imagined, had been completely severed. After the arraignment, Miranda and I walked directly to the civil court clerk's office to file divorce papers. The petition was comprehensive and unambiguous: dissolution of marriage, exclusive use of marital home, protection of all business assets, full reimbursement of attorney fees, and an emergency restraining order preventing Cameron from contacting me except through legal counsel. This will be served to him in jail this afternoon, Miranda said with visible satisfaction. By the time he makes bail, if he makes bail, he'll return home to find locks changed, accounts frozen, and a very clear message that you're not the victim he assumed you'd be. The media attention intensified over the following week. Every news outlet in Silverpine Heights covered the story, with several national business publications picking it up as a cautionary tale about corporate fraud and marital betrayal. Cosmetics CEO outsmarts husband's elaborate theft plot became the dominant narrative, framing me as both victim and strategic victor. I declined every interview request, every podcast invitation, every offer to share my story publicly. Natalie handled all inquiries about LuxGlow, issuing a brief statement that my personal situation would not affect our business operations, product development, or the upcoming retail expansion. The business community's response surprised me. Instead of the scandal damaging my reputation, clients and investors rallied around me with unprecedented support. Orders actually increased. The retail chain we'd partnered with accelerated our expansion timeline, and 3 new distributors reached out requesting meetings. Apparently fighting back against fraud makes you more trustworthy, not less, Natalie observed during one of our daily strategy sessions. People respect that you protected your business systematically rather than letting emotion destroy what you'd built. Cameron made bail on Friday. His parents had taken out a second mortgage on their home to raise the $750,000. Helen called me that evening, her voice thick with tears and desperation. "Cassandra, please. We need to talk about what's happening. Cameron says this is all a terrible misunderstanding, that you've overreacted to something you misinterpreted." The manipulation was almost impressive. Cameron had convinced his own mother that I was the problem, that I'd somehow manufactured this entire crisis. "Helen, I can't discuss this with you. Everything regarding Cameron needs to go through our attorneys now. But we're family. Surely we can resolve this privately without lawyers and courts and all this public drama." The word family stung, but I kept my voice steady. "We're not family anymore. I filed for divorce on Tuesday. The papers were served to Cameron in jail." She started crying harder. "He's still your husband. You took vows. For better or worse. The worse doesn't include tolerating systematic fraud and attempted theft of my life's work. I'm sorry you're caught in this, Helen, but Cameron made his choices. These are the consequences." I ended the call and immediately blocked her number. Miranda had warned me that Cameron's family would attempt emotional manipulation, appeals to loyalty, pressure to drop charges or settle quietly. I couldn't afford to waver. The following Tuesday brought unexpected news. Miranda called with barely contained excitement in her normally controlled voice. "Lawrence Pemberton just accepted a plea deal. He's pleading guilty to conspiracy to commit fraud and agreeing to testify against Cameron in exchange for a reduced sentence and surrendering his law license instead of facing additional criminal charges." "He's flipping on Cameron completely?" "Absolutely. The federal prosecutor interviewed him yesterday. Pemberton provided documentation of every meeting, every email, every detail of their conspiracy. Apparently Cameron approached him specifically because Pemberton had a reputation for ethically questionable work involving business asset transfers." My hands tightened on my phone. What exactly did Pemberton tell them? Cameron explicitly told Pemberton he wanted to legally acquire his wife's business assets before divorcing her. Pemberton walked him through various schemes, and they settled on the intellectual property transfer approach because it appeared most legitimate on paper while being functionally theft. And Pemberton's testimony will destroy any defense Cameron might attempt. With Pemberton's cooperation, the prosecutor now has ironclad evidence of premeditation, planning, and criminal intent. Cameron's attorney is already reaching out about a plea deal because going to trial would be suicide. What kind of plea deal? That depends on several factors, but expect them to offer guilty pleas to reduce charges in exchange for a lighter prison sentence. The prosecutor will likely accept because it guarantees conviction without trial expenses. I'd estimate Cameron will be offered somewhere between 4 to 7 years in federal prison. 4 to 7 years. It seemed simultaneously too much and not nearly enough. Too much time for what remained of Cameron's life and career to be destroyed. Not enough for the magnitude of his calculated betrayal and the years he'd spent manipulating me. What do I need to do? Nothing immediately. The criminal case will proceed independently. Our focus shifts entirely to finalizing the divorce. With Cameron facing certain conviction, his attorney will want to settle the divorce quickly and favorably to you. It makes him appear more cooperative and remorseful during sentencing. That evening, I did something symbolic. I took my wedding ring, a platinum band with small diamonds that Cameron had presented with such apparent sincerity 5 years ago, and brought it to a jewelry designer I'd worked with on Lux Glow product packaging. "I want this completely redesigned," I told her, sliding the ring across her workbench. "Melt it down, reset the stones, create something that represents who I am now, not who I was pretending to be." The designer, a talented artist named Chloe Kim, examined the ring thoughtfully. "What did you have in mind?" "A pendant. Modern, strong, with the diamonds arranged to represent the people who supported me through this nightmare. Natalie, Lauren, Miranda, my mother, the women who reminded me of my own strength when I was drowning." 2 weeks later, Chloe presented me with a stunning piece, the platinum transformed into a sleek, contemporary pendant with the diamonds arranged in a constellation pattern, each stone representing someone who'd stood by me. "I'm not erasing the past," I explained to Natalie when I showed her the finished piece. "I'm transforming it into something that reflects my present reality." I wore it to the opening of LuxGlow's first flagship retail store in the Riverside shopping district, a beautiful space with floor-to-ceiling windows, elegant product displays, and a custom consultation area where customers could receive personalized skincare recommendations. The grand opening drew over 300 people, loyal customers, industry colleagues, beauty influencers, and local media. Standing at the ribbon-cutting ceremony, surrounded by people who'd supported my business journey, I felt something shift inside me. This store represents more than business expansion, I told the assembled crowd. It represents the power of building something authentic, something that can't be stolen or diminished by others' betrayal. Thank you all for being part of this journey. The applause was genuine and warm. Among the faces, I spotted several women who'd quietly approached me over the past weeks, other victims of financial fraud in relationships, women who'd found courage in my story to protect themselves or leave dangerous situations. After the ceremony, a young woman in her late 20s approached hesitantly. "Ms. Monroe, I'm sorry to bother you, but I wanted to thank you personally. Not just for your products, but for everything you did regarding your ex-husband." I studied her face, noting the nervousness in her posture. "Have we met?" "No, but my name is Anya Kowalski. I was engaged to Cameron Whitfield 3 years before you married him." My heart stopped. Another one. Another victim in Cameron's pattern. "I owned a small graphic design studio," Anya continued, her voice quiet but steady. "Cameron convinced me to make him a business partner. Within 6 months, he'd stolen over $60,000, forged client contracts, and tried to sell the business without my knowledge. I caught him before he could complete the sale, but the damage destroyed my company anyway." "Did you report him?" Anya shook her head, tears forming. "His parents paid me $30,000 to drop any legal action and sign a non-disclosure agreement. I was broke, desperate, terrified of legal fees I couldn't afford. I took the money and tried to forget it happened." "But you're talking to me now." "The NDA. That agreement was about protecting Cameron, and I'm done protecting him. When I saw that you'd fought back and won, that you'd exposed him and pressed charges instead of staying silent, it gave me hope that maybe speaking up now could prevent him from doing this to someone else in the future." I took both her hands in mine. "Anya, thank you for telling me. Your story matters, and your courage in speaking up now matters enormously." We exchanged contact information, and I immediately sent her details to Miranda and the federal prosecutor. Pattern evidence. More proof that Cameron was a serial predator who'd refined his methods over years and multiple victims. 3 months after Cameron's arrest, his plea hearing took place. He appeared before a federal judge and formally pled guilty to conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted theft of intellectual property, and wire fraud. 3 felony convictions that would likely result in a sentence of 5 to 8 years in federal prison. I didn't attend this hearing. Miranda represented my interests while I focused on what actually mattered: running my business, supporting my employees, and building a life that reflected my authentic values rather than the performance I'd been maintaining during my marriage. The divorce was finalized on a cold January morning, exactly 4 months after I'd overheard Cameron's conspiracy. The hearing took less than 10 minutes. Cameron's attorney had negotiated a settlement where Cameron contested nothing, claimed nothing, and relinquished all rights to any assets, business interests, or future revenues from LuxGlow. He agreed to pay my attorney fees, over $100,000, from his personal accounts. He signed away any claim to our marital home. Most importantly, he signed a clause preventing him from ever writing about, discussing publicly, or profiting in any way from our relationship or this situation. The judge reviewed the settlement with careful attention. "Mr. Whitfield, you understand that by signing this agreement, you are waiving all marital property rights and any potential claims to your wife's business assets?" "Yes, Your Honor." Cameron's voice was barely audible. "And you enter into this agreement voluntarily, without coercion?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Very well. The marriage between Cassandra Monroe and Cameron Whitfield is hereby dissolved. You are both legally free to remarry should you choose." Just like that, 5 years of marriage evaporated in a procedural exchange. Cameron left the courtroom without looking at me. His attorney followed, and I was left standing with Miranda in the empty space. "How do you feel?" Miranda asked. I considered the question carefully. "Free. Completely, authentically free." Cameron's sentencing hearing occurred 2 weeks later. I submitted a written victim impact statement rather than appearing in person. Cameron Whitfield spent nearly a year planning to steal my business through systematic fraud and manipulation of our marriage. His actions represented not a momentary lapse in judgment but a calculated, sustained campaign of deception. Evidence has shown he employed this same pattern against at least 3 other women before me, refining his methods with each victim. However, I don't believe in vengeance for its own sake. Cameron has pled guilty to serious federal crimes. He's lost his career, his reputation, his marriage, and his freedom. He's paying substantial restitution. My primary concern is protection of future potential victims. Cameron should remain under strict financial monitoring throughout his supervised release period. He should be prohibited from working in any position involving access to others' confidential business information or assets. And he should be required to complete intensive therapy addressing whatever pathology drives him to repeatedly target and exploit successful women. My goal isn't his eternal punishment, it's accountability for his established pattern and protection for anyone he might target in the future. The judge sentenced Cameron to 6 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised release with the exact conditions I'd recommended. I learned about the sentence through a text from Miranda. I was in my office at LuxGlow headquarters, reviewing formulations for our spring product line, when the message came through. I felt no triumph, no satisfaction, just quiet acknowledgement that justice had followed its proper course. That evening, I drove to Lauren's house in Brookstone for dinner with her family. My nieces, ages 5 and 7, greeted me with enthusiastic hugs and demands to see pictures of the new flagship store. "Aunt Cass, Mom says you're the bravest person she knows," 7-year-old Riley announced over dinner. "She says you teach people how to protect themselves." Lauren smiled at me across the table. "We've been talking about standing up to bullies and protecting what's yours." Riley had a situation at school where another kid was stealing her art supplies, and she handled it by documenting what was happening and telling the teacher with evidence. "Just like you did with Uncle Cameron," Riley said matter-of-factly, as if exposing spousal fraud was equivalent to playground justice. The simplicity of a child's perspective, bad people do bad things, brave people stop them, justice prevails, felt refreshing after months of legal complexity. 6 months after my divorce, I launched the Monroe Foundation for Economic Justice, a nonprofit organization providing legal support and resources to victims of financial fraud in intimate relationships. The foundation offered 3 primary services: a confidential hotline, partnerships with attorneys willing to provide pro bono representation, and emergency grants for people fleeing financially abusive situations. Brielle Sutton and Anya Kowalski both joined the advisory board, lending their experiences to shape programs that would have helped them years ago. Within the first month, we received over 400 calls from people across 3 states describing patterns eerily similar to Cameron's methods. "We're not just helping individuals," our program director observed during a board meeting. "We're documenting a widespread problem that law enforcement and the legal system have largely ignored." She was absolutely right. Financial abuse in relationships existed in a gray area, not quite domestic violence in the traditional sense, not quite white-collar crime, often invisible until catastrophic damage occurred. Our foundation was illuminating that gray area, making the invisible visible, and giving victims tools to fight back. 1 year after discovering Cameron's betrayal, I was invited to keynote the National Women Entrepreneurs Summit in Chicago. The topic: strategic resilience in business and life. I'd initially declined, uncomfortable with publicly discussing such personal trauma. But Natalie had convinced me otherwise. "Your story isn't just about betrayal," she'd argued. "It's about protecting what you've built, thinking strategically under pressure, and transforming pain into purpose. Those are lessons every entrepreneur needs." So I found myself on stage before 2,000 business owners, executives, and investors, sharing my story with careful honesty. When I discovered my husband's plan to steal my company, I said, I had a choice. React emotionally, confront him immediately, burn everything down in rage, or respond strategically. Gather evidence, build an airtight case, protect my assets systematically. I chose strategy, and it saved everything I'd built. I paused, looking out at the sea of attentive faces. But here's what I need you to understand. Choosing strategy over immediate emotional reaction doesn't mean you don't feel the emotions. I was devastated, furious, heartbroken. But I refused to let those feelings dictate my actions until I'd secured my foundation. There's a time for emotional processing, and there's a time for cold, calculated self-protection. Knowing which time you're in can make all the difference. The response was overwhelming. Afterward, dozens of people approached me, not just offering sympathy, but sharing their own stories of business betrayals, partnership disasters, and the strategic thinking that had saved them. I'd expected to feel vulnerable sharing my story so publicly. Instead, I felt connected to a community of survivors who understood that strength sometimes looks like spreadsheets and evidence files rather than confrontation and drama. That evening, I had dinner with an old colleague from my early cosmetics days, Julian Rhodes. Julian had built his own successful skincare line and had flown to Chicago specifically for the summit. I have to admit, Julian said over wine at a rooftop restaurant overlooking the city, when I heard about what Cameron did, my first instinct was to fly to Silver Pine Heights and personally make him regret existing. I laughed. That would have been counterproductive, though I appreciate the sentiment. I'm serious, though. You and I struggled together in those early farmers market days. I watched you build Lux Glow from literally nothing. The idea of someone trying to steal that made me furious on your behalf. His words touched something deep. The person who tried to steal it is now in federal prison, so justice was served without requiring violence. Julian studied me across the table. You're different. Not damaged, just more solid somehow. Like you found bedrock beneath everything. His observation echoed what I'd been feeling but couldn't quite articulate. The trauma had burned away certain illusions about relationships, trust, and human nature. What remained felt more authentic, if harder. I know exactly who I am now, I said slowly. Not who I am in relation to someone else, not who I'm performing being for anyone's benefit, but genuinely who I am. It's a strange gift to receive from a catastrophe. We talked until the restaurant closed, catching up on years of separate journeys and discussing potential collaboration on a sustainable packaging initiative Julian was developing. Flying home the next day, I reflected on how dramatically my life had transformed in just 1 year. Then I'd been a wife, or believed I was. My identity had been partially wrapped up in my marriage, even as I'd maintained professional independence. Now I was simply Cassandra Monroe, CEO, founder, survivor, strategist, advocate. Each role felt authentically mine in a way that Cameron's wife never had. 2 years after the divorce, on what would have been our 7th wedding anniversary, I hosted a celebration at my completely renovated home. Every room had been transformed, walls removed, spaces reconfigured, design elements chosen purely for my preferences without compromise or consideration of anyone else's taste. Most significantly, I'd converted Cameron's former office into a beautiful library and meditation space. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves held my collection of business books, novels, and industry journals. A comfortable reading chair sat by the window overlooking the garden I'd expanded and redesigned. The room that had once held such menace now felt peaceful, contemplative, entirely mine. Natalie arrived with her fiancé, a marine biologist named Dr. Rachel Ng who made Natalie laugh more than I'd ever seen. Lauren came with her family. Miranda even made an appearance, rare for someone who typically avoided social gatherings. I wanted to see the transformation for myself, Miranda said, touring the renovated spaces. It's remarkable. Completely different energy from the house I remember. As the sun set over Silver Pine Heights, I stood on my back deck with a glass of wine, watching the sky paint itself in shades of amber and rose. My phone buzzed with messages, congratulations on the retail expansion reaching 5,000 stores, an invitation to speak at another industry conference, a grant notification for the Monroe Foundation. My life had become fully, completely, authentically mine. Not built in reaction to Cameron's betrayal, but created intentionally from the clarity that crisis had forced me to find. Standing there, I could honestly say I was grateful. Not for what Cameron had done, his actions were inexcusable and had caused genuine harm. But for who I'd become in response. For the strength I'd discovered. For the purpose I'd found in helping others. For the absolute freedom of living without performance or pretense. Cameron had tried to steal my company, my intellectual property, my life's work. Instead, he'd accidentally given me back myself. And that, I'd finally realized, was worth infinitely more than any business empire. I raised my glass in a private toast, not to revenge, not even to justice, but to transformation. To reclamation. To the woman I'd fought to become. To freedom. Coming up next, you'll see 2 more stories we handpicked just for you. If this one struck a chord, you're going to love what's next. Tap to keep the journey going.